In the vast tapestry of Westeros and Essos, where ice meets fire and shadow dances with light, magic flows like an ancient river through the veins of the world. From the towering wall built with forgotten spells to the burning ruins of old Valyria, arcane forces have shaped the destiny of kings and commoners alike. Tonight, we journey through the mystical arts that define the world of ice and fire, the elemental powers that bend reality, the prophetic visions that pierce time's veil, and the forbidden rituals that blur the line between life and death. Let these ancient mysteries guide you into peaceful slumber. In the beginning, when the world was young and the memory of creation still lingered in the whispered songs of wind through ancient trees, magic was not a rare gift, but the very breath of existence itself. The Dawn Age marked a time when the supernatural and the natural existed as one, when the boundaries between dream and waking, between life and the forces that govern it, remained beautifully blurred in ways that would seem impossible to the skeptical minds of later generations. The children of the forest emerged as the first true practitioners of the mystical arts in Westeros, small beings of profound wisdom whose connection to the natural world transcended anything that would follow in the ages to come. These ancient inhabitants possessed eyes that reflected the deep pools of moonlit water, and their understanding of magic flowed as naturally as breathing. They did not seek to dominate or control the arcane forces around them, instead choosing to work in harmony with powers that pulsed through every root, every stone, every breath of wind that stirred the primordial forests of their homeland. Their magic manifested most powerfully through the sacred weirwood trees, those pale giants with bone-white bark and leaves that burned crimson as fresh blood. The children carved faces into these ancient sentinels, creating a network of watching eyes that could peer across vast distances and through the flowing currents of time itself. Through these carved faces, the green seers among them gained the ability to witness events that had not yet come to pass, to observe the secret conversations of kings and peasants alike, and to understand the deeper patterns that connected all living things in an intricate web of cause and consequence. The gift of green sight came rarely, appearing perhaps once in 1,000 children, and those blessed with this ability became the wise ones of their people, the keepers of memory and prophecy who guided their communities through the long cycles of growth and change. These green seers could slip their consciousness into the weirwood network, experiencing visions that spanned centuries, watching the rise and fall of civilizations with the patient wisdom of beings who understood that all things must eventually return to the earth from which they came. Alongside the green seers walked the skin changers, those blessed with the ability to enter the minds of beasts and see through their eyes. This gift allowed the children to form bonds with the wolves and ravens, the great cats and bears that roamed their forests, creating alliances that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Through the eyes of flying creatures, they could scout distant lands, while the pack hunters became their allies in war and peace alike, extending their awareness far beyond the limits of their small bodies. The arrival of the first men marked a turning point in the magical history of Westeros, bringing with them bronze weapons and the burning ambition of those who sought to claim new lands for their own. These tall warriors from across the narrow sea looked upon the dense forests of Westeros and saw not sacred groves, but obstacles to be cleared, not ancient wisdom, but primitive superstition that stood in the way of progress and settlement. The first men carried no understanding of the subtle magics that flowed through the land they sought to conquer. They came with fire and bronze, cutting down the weirwoods whose faces had watched over the realm since time immemorial, and in doing so, they severed connections that had taken millennia to establish. The children watched in horror as their sacred network began to fragment, as the voices of the old gods grew fainter with each fallen tree, and as the delicate balance between the magical and mundane world began to shift in ways that would echo through all the ages to come. War erupted between these two peoples, a conflict that would rage for generations and reshape the very foundations of Westeros. The children, though small in stature, possessed powers that the first men could scarcely comprehend. They called upon their green seers to work great magics, turning the very land against the invaders. Rivers changed their courses to wash away the camps of the first men, while the earth itself rose up to swallow their bronze-clad warriors. The most dramatic display of the children's power came when they used their magic to shatter the land bridge that connected Westeros to Essos, creating what would later be known as the Stepstones. This tremendous working required the combined efforts of many green seers, and though it succeeded in slowing the invasion, it also demonstrated the terrible price that such great magics demanded. Many of the children who participated in this ritual gave their lives to fuel the spell, their essence becoming part of the very stones and waters they had sundered. Yet, for all their power, the children could not halt the tide of bronze and ambition that swept across their ancient realm. The first men proved too numerous, too determined, and too willing to accept losses in pursuit of their goals. As the war dragged on, both sides began to understand that their conflict threatened to destroy not just their own peoples, but the very land they fought to control. It was in this darkest hour that wisdom prevailed over warfare, leading to one of the most significant events in the magical history of Westeros. The two peoples came together on the Isle of Faces, a sacred island where every weirwood bore a carved visage, creating a natural amphitheater where the old gods themselves could bear witness to what transpired. The pact that emerged from these negotiations represented far more than a simple peace treaty between warring peoples. It established a new relationship between humanity and the magical forces that governed the natural world, creating boundaries and agreements that would influence the development of both peoples for thousands of years to come. The first men agreed to cease their destruction of the weirwoods and to respect the sacred places of the children, while the children accepted that humanity would claim the open lands and build their halls and holdfasts across the realm. More significantly, many of the first men chose to abandon the gods they had brought from across the narrow sea, instead adopting the faith of the old gods that the children had served since the dawn of time. This spiritual transformation created a bridge between the two peoples that transcended mere politics, establishing a connection to the magical forces of Westeros that would flow through the bloodlines of the first men for countless generations. The intermingling of these two peoples also led to the passing of certain gifts from the children to humanity. The ability to skin change, to slip one's consciousness into the mind of a beast, began to appear among the descendants of the first men, though far more rarely than it had among the children themselves. Similarly, the gift of green sight occasionally manifested in human bloodlines, creating a new generation of seers who could touch the ancient network of weirwoods and glimpse the patterns of time and fate. This blending of magical traditions reached its most dramatic expression in the construction of the wall, that tremendous barrier of ice and enchantment that would one day separate the realm of men from the wild lands beyond. Legend credits Bran the Builder, founder of House Stark, with this incredible achievement. But the truth proves far more complex and collaborative than simple tales suggest. The wall represents the greatest single magical working ever accomplished in Westeros, requiring not just the combined efforts of men and the children of the forest, but also the assistance of giants whose strength could move blocks of ice the size of castles. The construction involved far more than simple engineering, incorporating spells and enchantments that would preserve the wall against the ravages of time and weather, while also creating barriers against magical threats that conventional fortifications could never hope to contain. The magic woven into the wall draws upon the same forces that flow through the weirwood network, creating a barrier that exists on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. While physical creatures might scale its heights or tunnel beneath its foundations, beings of pure magical essence find themselves unable to pass, turned back by forces they cannot comprehend or overcome. This aspect of the wall's construction suggests that its builders possessed knowledge of threats that had not yet fully manifested in the world, preparing defenses against enemies that would not emerge for thousands of years. The completion of the wall marked the end of the Dawn Age and the beginning of the Age of Heroes, that legendary time when the greatest figures of Westerosi history walked the earth and performed deeds that would echo through song and story for millennia to come. Yet even as the wall rose to its full height and the magical defenses took hold, those who understood the deeper currents of power recognized that this great working represented both an ending and a beginning. The magic that had once flowed freely throughout Westeros began to concentrate itself in specific places and bloodlines, becoming less common but more focused in its manifestations. The casual miracles of the Dawn Age gave way to the more structured and limited magical traditions that would characterize the later history of the realm. The old gods still whispered through the leaves of the remaining weirwoods, and the gift of the sight still appeared in certain bloodlines, but the age of open magic was drawing to a close. The legacy of the Dawn Age lived on in the great castles and strongholds that dotted Westeros, many of which incorporated magical elements into their very foundations. Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, was built around natural hot springs, whose warmth defied the northern climate, while Storm's End rose on a foundation of stones cut and placed with such precision that no storm had ever been able to breach its walls. These structures served as reminders of an age when magic and mundane construction worked hand in hand to create wonders that would endure for thousands of years. The bloodlines that emerged from the mixing of first men and children carried within them the potential for magical gifts that would manifest in times of great need or change. The ability to skin change remained strongest in the north, where the old ways persisted longest and the blood of the first men ran most pure. The Starks of Winterfell proved particularly blessed with these gifts, maintaining a connection to the natural world and the old gods that would prove crucial in the dark times to come. As the Dawn Age drew to its close and the Age of Heroes began, the foundations had been laid for all the magical traditions that would follow. The network of weirwoods continued to spread their influence across the realm. The Wall stood as an eternal guardian against threats both known and unknown, and the bloodlines of men carried within them the seeds of power that would bloom again when the world had greatest need of their protection and guidance. From the volcanic peaks of the 14 Flames rose an empire that would reshape the known world through mastery of magic unlike anything seen before or since. The Valyrian Freehold emerged from the dragon-haunted peninsula of Essos as a civilization built upon the twin foundations of fire and blood, where sorcery flowed through the veins of the dragon lords as naturally as breath filled their lungs. Their power would stretch across continents and endure for millennia, leaving behind mysteries that scholars still struggle to comprehend in the present age. The origins of Valyrian magic remain shrouded in legend and speculation, though most accounts trace their sorcerous knowledge to the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. Ancient texts speak of pale-skinned wanderers who arrived at the 14 Flames thousands of years before the rise of the great houses, bearing with them knowledge of blood magic and fire sorcery that would form the cornerstone of their civilization. These early settlers found in the volcanic landscape a perfect match for their arcane arts, establishing temples and ritual sites where the earth's fire could fuel their most ambitious magical workings. The dragons themselves represented the pinnacle of Valyrian magical achievement, though whether these magnificent creatures were discovered, created, or somehow summoned from distant realms remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. What cannot be disputed is the profound connection between dragon and dragon lord, a bond that transcended simple animal training to become something approaching a merging of souls. This connection required blood magic of the most intimate kind, rituals that bound the fate of rider and mount together in ways that could never be broken, not even by death itself. The process of bonding with a dragon began before birth, with pregnant dragon lords performing ceremonies that would link their unborn children to dragon eggs placed in their cradles. These eggs, warmed by the heat of Valyrian hearths and bathed in the smoke of sacred fires, would absorb something of the child's essence during the long months of incubation. When both child and dragon finally emerged into the world, they carried within them a connection that made them two halves of a greater whole, each incomplete without the other. The blood of the dragon, as the Valyrians called their magical heritage, manifested in ways both subtle and dramatic. Those blessed with the strongest draconic bloodlines possessed an immunity to fire that allowed them to walk through flames unharmed, their pale hair remaining unmarked by heat that would consume lesser mortals. Their eyes, ranging from deep violet to pale lilac, could see through smoke and shadow with the clarity of their dragon companions, while their dreams often carried prophetic visions of futures yet to unfold. These dragon dreams represented one of the most valuable aspects of Valyrian magic, providing the Dragon Lords with glimpses of coming events that allowed them to navigate the treacherous currents of politics and war with supernatural foresight. The dreams came unpredictably, often during times of great stress or change, manifesting as vivid visions that could reveal everything from personal betrayals to the rise and fall of entire civilizations. The most powerful dreamers learned to interpret these visions with remarkable accuracy, using their prophetic insights to guide the expansion of Valyrian power across the known world. The forging of Valyrian steel represented perhaps the most enduring legacy of their magical traditions, creating weapons and tools whose quality has never been matched by subsequent civilizations. The process required far more than simple metallurgy, incorporating blood magic, dragonfire, and arcane knowledge that died with the doom. Each blade began with the finest steel, folded and refolded countless times until it achieved a flexibility and strength that defied natural law. But the true magic occurred during the final stages of creation. Master smiths would bathe the heated metal in dragonfire while chanting incantations in High Valyrian, the ancient tongue that carried within its very syllables the power to shape reality according to the will of the speaker. The blood of the smith would be mixed with rare spells and precious metals, creating an alloy that transcended the merely physical to become something approaching the divine. The resulting weapons could hold an edge for decades without dulling, cut through armor as though it were silk, and maintain their distinctive rippled patterns that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. The color of Valyrian steel varied depending on the specific rituals used in its creation and the bloodline of the smith who forged it. The pale blue-gray of ice, the ancestral blade of House Stark, differed markedly from the deep red of Red Rain or the smoky darkness of Blackfire, each hue reflecting the particular magical traditions employed in its making. These differences were not merely aesthetic, but indicated fundamental variations in the steel's properties, with some blades proving more effective against certain types of enemies or in specific magical circumstances. The 14 flames themselves served as the beating heart of Valyrian civilization, providing not just the physical foundation for their society, but also the magical energy that powered their greatest working. These volcanic peaks were far more than simple mountains, having been shaped and guided by centuries of sorcerous intervention until they became living conduits for the elemental forces of fire and earth. Deep beneath their slopes lay chambers where the Dragon Lords conducted their most secret rituals, drawing upon the planet's molten core to fuel magic of unimaginable power. The fire mages who tended these sacred flames represented a distinct branch of Valyrian sorcery, dedicating their lives to maintaining the delicate balance that kept the volcanoes stable and productive. These priests and priestesses performed daily rituals that channeled the earth's fury into constructive purposes, providing the intense heat necessary for Dragonlord forges and the magical energy required for the most ambitious spells. Their knowledge of elemental fire magic extended far beyond simple temperature control, encompassing the ability to see through flames, communicate across vast distances, and even peer into the hearts and minds of those who gazed into their sacred fires. The temples of Valyria rose like crystalline flowers from the volcanic landscape, their twisted spires reaching toward the sky in defiance of conventional architecture. These structures were not built, but grown, shaped through magical processes that fused stone and metal into forms of impossible beauty and strength. The temple walls incorporated veins of precious metals that pulsed with inner light, while the floors were inlaid with patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on the viewer's angle and state of mind. Within these temples, the Dragonlords conducted ceremonies that bound their bloodlines to the ancient powers they served, renewing the pacts that granted them dominion over fire and dragon alike. These rituals required the participation of entire families, with each member contributing their blood and essence to the collective magical working that maintained their supernatural abilities. The ceremonies were beautiful and terrible to behold, involving the sacrifice of rare creatures and the chanting of spells that could reshape reality according to the will of the participants. The expansion of Valyrian power across Essos was accomplished as much through magic as through military might, with the Dragonlords employing sorcery to overcome obstacles that would have proven insurmountable to conventional armies. They could part rivers with a gesture, level mountains with a word, and create bridges of solidified flame that allowed their forces to cross impossible terrain. The very sight of dragons overhead was often enough to convince enemy cities to surrender without a fight. Recognizing the futility of resisting power that transcended the normal limits of warfare, the roads that connected the far-flung provinces of the Valyrian Empire were themselves works of magic, constructed with stones that remained perfectly fitted despite centuries of weather and the passage of countless armies. These thoroughfares incorporated subtle enchantments that protected travelers from bandits and wild beasts, while waypoints along their length provided shelter and sustenance through magical means that required no human maintenance. The network of Valyrian roads represented one of the most practical applications of their sorcery, creating an infrastructure that continued to serve the known world long after the Empire's collapse. The governance of such a vast empire required magical solutions to problems of communication and control that would have overwhelmed any conventional administration. The Dragonlords developed a system of glass candles, crystalline artifacts that allowed instantaneous communication across thousands of miles, enabling the central government to coordinate policies and respond to crises with supernatural efficiency. These devices required trained operators who possessed the blood of old Valyria, their magical heritage providing the necessary connection to make the candles burn with their characteristic bright, steady flame. The glass candles also served as tools of surveillance and intelligence gathering, allowing skilled users to peer into distant locations and observe events as they unfolded. This capability proved invaluable for maintaining control over rebellious provinces and detecting threats before they could mature into serious challenges to Valyrian authority. The knowledge that their activities might be observed through magical means served as a powerful deterrent to those who might otherwise have contemplated sedition or betrayal. The magical practices of the Valyrians were not without their costs and dangers, demanding prices that even the mightiest dragon lords found difficult to pay. The blood magic that powered their greatest workings required constant renewal through ritual sacrifice, creating a society where the weak served as fuel for the ambitions of the strong. The connection between Dragon Lord and dragon, while granting incredible power, also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those who understood the deeper principles of their magic. The practice of intermarriage within the Dragon Lord families, undertaken to preserve the purity of their magical bloodlines, led to physical and mental instabilities that grew more pronounced with each generation. The saying that gods flip a coin when a Targaryen is born reflected the double-edged nature of draconic heritage, granting either greatness or madness with seemingly equal probability. The magic that flowed through their veins could enhance their natural abilities to superhuman levels, or twist their minds into forms of beautiful insanity that left them unable to distinguish reality from the visions that danced behind their eyes. The doom of Valyria arrived without warning on a day when the skies were clear and the dragons soared peacefully above their ancestral home. In a single cataclysmic moment, the 14 flames erupted simultaneously, with a fury that shattered the very foundations of the earth, sending towers that had stood for millennia crashing into the suddenly molten ground. The sea itself boiled away in clouds of superheated steam, while the air filled with ash and poison that killed everything it touched. The exact cause of the doom remains one of history's greatest mysteries, with scholars proposing theories ranging from natural disaster to magical sabotage to divine punishment for the hubris of those who had sought to make themselves equal to gods. Some accounts speak of rival factions among the Dragon Lords, whose conflicts escalated beyond all reason, leading to magical workings so powerful that they destabilized the very forces that kept Valyria stable. Others suggest that the fire mages who tended the 14 flames were murdered or corrupted, leaving the volcanoes without the careful guidance they required to remain dormant. The prophecy of Daenerys the Dreamer, which saved House Targaryen from sharing the fate of their fellow dragon lords, demonstrated both the power and the limitations of Valyrian foresight. Her dragon dreams showed her visions of fire and destruction 12 years before the doom, providing enough warning for her family to relocate to Dragonstone, but the images she saw were too symbolic and fragmented to allow for a clearer understanding of what was to come or how it might be prevented. The aftermath of the doom left the peninsula of Valyria a smoking wasteland where no life could survive, the very air poisoned by magical toxins that remained deadly centuries later. The few sailors, brave or foolish enough to explore the ruins, reported seeing strange lights moving among the rubble, shadows that walked without casting bodies, and dragons made of smoke and flame that attacked any living creature that dared to trespass on the graveyard of the world's greatest civilization. Yet the legacy of Valyrian magic did not die with the destruction of their homeland, surviving in scattered bloodlines, ancient artifacts, and the enduring knowledge preserved in books and scrolls that had been carried to distant lands. The Targaryens on Dragonstone maintained their dragons and their magical traditions, eventually using both to conquer the Seven Kingdoms and establish a new dynasty that would rule Westeros for nearly 3 centuries. Their reign demonstrated that Valyrian power could adapt and survive even in lands that had no tradition of fire magic, though the cost of maintaining their ancient ways grew heavier with each passing generation. The glass candles that had once connected the far reaches of the Valyrian Empire flickered and went dark with the doom, their light extinguished along with the civilization that had created them. For centuries, they remained cold and lifeless. Museum pieces that reminded the world of powers that had passed beyond recall. Yet, the return of dragons to the world would rekindle these ancient artifacts, proving that the deepest magics of Valyria were merely sleeping rather than truly dead, waiting for the proper bloodline and the proper catalyst to awaken them once again from their long slumber. The gift of sight has manifested throughout the known world in forms as varied as the cultures that birthed them, yet all share the fundamental ability to pierce the veil of time and glimpse truths that lie hidden from ordinary perception. From the green dreams of the north to the dragon visions of old Valyria, from the flame-born prophecies of R'hllor's servants to the ancient arts of glass candle scrying, divination represents perhaps the most coveted and dangerous of all magical abilities. Those blessed or cursed with prophetic sight find themselves burdened with knowledge that comes at a terrible price, for to see the future is to bear responsibility for events that may yet be changed or may prove inevitable despite all efforts to alter their course. The green site of the north stands as perhaps the oldest and most deeply rooted form of divination in Westeros, tracing its origins back to the children of the forest who first carved faces into the pale bark of weirwood trees. This ancient magic flows through the blood of the first men, manifesting rarely but powerfully in those whose lineage reaches back to the Dawn Age, when gods and mortals walked the earth as equals. The gift appears perhaps once in 1,000 births, creating seers whose abilities transcend the normal boundaries of human perception. Bran Stark's awakening to his greenseer abilities, following his fall from Winterfell's broken tower, demonstrates both the potential and the peril inherent in this ancient gift. His early visions came unbidden and uncontrolled, showing him fragments of past and future that he lacked the wisdom to interpret properly. The three-eyed crow that appeared in his dreams served as both guide and warning, leading him toward a destiny that would transform him from a crippled boy into something far greater and far more terrible than any normal human being. The journey to the cave beyond the wall revealed the true nature of Greensight and its connection to the vast network of weirwoods that spans the known world. The last Greenseer, revealed to be the bastard Brynden Rivers, who had once served as Hand of the King, had become something more than human through decades of communion with the ancient trees. His body had grown into the very roots and branches of the great weirwood that sustained his life, creating a fusion of flesh and wood that allowed him to see through every carved face from the wall to the summer aisles. The process of becoming a full green seer demands sacrifices that few would willingly accept, requiring the abandonment of human desires and physical limitations in exchange for perspective that encompasses centuries rather than mere decades. The candidate must learn to slip their consciousness into the weirwood network, experiencing the accumulated memories of countless generations while maintaining enough sense of self to avoid becoming lost in the overwhelming flow of information. Many who attempt this transformation never return, their minds scattered across the vast web of connections until nothing remains of their original identity. The visions granted by Greensight prove both more and less reliable than other forms of prophecy, offering glimpses of actual events rather than symbolic representations, but providing no clear indication of when these events will occur, or whether they represent fixed destiny or merely one possible future among many. Bran's vision of his father in the crypts of Winterfell, shared by his brother Rickon, demonstrated the ability of green seers to perceive coming deaths, yet this knowledge proved useless for preventing the tragedy that befell Ned Stark in King's Landing. Jojen Reed's green dreams represent a more limited but perhaps more accessible form of prophetic sight, manifesting in vivid nighttime visions that come to those with sufficient First Men blood, but not the full power of green sight. His dreams of the winged wolf chained to earth guided him to Bran Stark's side, fulfilling a destiny that had been written in his visions years before they met. The price of these dreams showed itself in Jojen's increasingly frail health, as though each glimpse of the future cost him some portion of his remaining life force. The connection between Greensight and the old gods remains one of the most mysterious aspects of this form of divination, raising questions about whether the carved faces serve as conduits for divine consciousness, or simply as focal points for a magic that transcends conventional understanding. The whispered prayers offered before heart trees receive answers that suggest some form of intelligence behind the network. Yet, whether this represents the actual presence of deities or simply the accumulated wisdom of countless green seers remains unclear. Dragon dreams manifest in the bloodlines descended from old Valyria with the same rarity and intensity as Greensight appears among the First Men, creating visionaries whose prophetic abilities shaped the rise and fall of the greatest empire the world has ever known. These visions come wrapped in imagery of fire and blood, revealing futures where dragons soar through smoke-filled skies, and the fate of kingdoms hangs upon the edge of Valyrian steel. Unlike the often literal nature of green dreams, dragon visions tend toward the symbolic and allegorical, requiring interpretation skills that few possess. Daenys the Dreamer's prophetic vision of Valyria's destruction stands as the most historically significant dragon dream on record, providing the warning that saved House Targaryen from sharing the fate of their fellow dragon lords. Her dreams showed her fires that burned hotter than any dragon's breath, consuming towers that had stood for millennia and reducing the greatest civilization in history to ash and memory. The symbolic nature of these visions meant that she could not predict the exact timing of the doom, only that it would come within her lifetime and bring destruction beyond imagination. The dragon dreams of Daenerys Targaryen demonstrate how this gift manifests in the present age, providing glimpses of her destiny as the mother of dragons, while also hinting at the terrible costs that her choices will demand. Her visions of dragons emerging from pillars of flame proved prophetic when she walked into Drogo's funeral pyre and emerged with 3 newly hatched dragons, but her dreams of burning armies clad in ice speak to conflicts yet to come that may determine the fate of all humanity. The complexity of interpreting dragon dreams shows itself in the varying accounts of Aegon the Conqueror's motivations for conquering Westeros, with some sources suggesting that his dragon visions revealed the coming threat of the others, and the need for a united realm to face them. If true, this would mean that the Iron Throne was forged not for conquest alone, but as preparation for a war that would not begin for 3 centuries, demonstrating the long-term perspective that prophetic sight can provide to those wise enough to act upon it. The Red Priests of R'hllor practice their own form of divination through the sacred flames that burn in temples from Volantis to Ashai, seeking visions of their God's will and glimpses of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. These flame-born prophecies differ markedly from both Green Sight and Dragon Dreams, focusing on the cosmic battle between good and evil rather than the personal destinies of individuals or families. The visions come to those who have dedicated their lives to R'hllor's service, manifesting as images that dance within the sacred fires during moments of deep meditation and prayer. Melisandre's interpretation of her flame visions demonstrates both the power and the limitations of this form of divination, as her absolute faith in R'hllor's messages leads her to see patterns and meanings that may not actually exist within the dancing fires. Her initial certainty that Stannis Baratheon represented Azor Ahai reborn gave way to confusion when her visions began showing her Jon Snow instead, forcing her to confront the possibility that her interpretations had been flawed from the beginning. The tendency of flame visions to focus on broad themes rather than specific events makes them particularly prone to misinterpretation, as the same image of a sword wreathed in fire might represent any number of different heroes or conflicts, depending on the viewer's perspective and preconceptions. The priests who practice this form of divination learn to approach their visions with humility, recognizing that R'hllor's messages often prove more complex and ambiguous than they initially appear. The glass candles of old Valyria represent perhaps the most sophisticated form of magical scrying ever developed, combining the prophetic abilities of trained users with the technological precision of Valyrian sorcery. These obsidian artifacts burn with flames that give off light without heat, creating an unsettling illumination that reveals hidden truths while casting shadows so deep they seem to lead into other worlds entirely. The candles allow their operators to see across vast distances, enter the dreams of sleeping individuals and communicate instantaneously with other candle users, regardless of the physical barriers that separate them. The reactivation of glass candles following the birth of Daenerys's dragons proved that these ancient artifacts remained connected to the magical forces that had created them, resuming their functions after centuries of dormancy. Archmaester Marwyn's successful use of a glass candle at the Citadel demonstrated that the knowledge required to operate these devices had not been entirely lost, though it required considerable skill and possibly some degree of Valyrian blood to achieve reliable results. The potential applications of glass candle technology extend far beyond simple communication or surveillance, encompassing abilities that blur the line between divination and direct magical intervention. Skilled operators can implant visions in the minds of distant targets, influence their dreams and decisions, and even provide guidance or warnings that appear to come from supernatural sources. This capability makes the candles potentially the most powerful tools of magical influence in the known world, limited only by the skill and intentions of those who wield them. The accuracy of glass candle visions appears to surpass that of other forms of divination, providing clear images of current events rather than the symbolic or fragmented glimpses offered by dreams and flames. This reliability comes at the cost of requiring extensive training and practice to master, as well as the physical and mental strain of maintaining the magical connection necessary to operate the devices effectively. The bright, steady light of an active candle can be uncomfortable or even painful to observe directly, while prolonged use leaves operators exhausted and drained. The Maesters of the Citadel possess 4 glass candles among their collection of ancient artifacts, though only a handful of scholars have ever succeeded in making them burn. The official position of the Order treats these devices as curiosities from a more credulous age, refusing to acknowledge their genuine magical properties despite mounting evidence of their effectiveness. This skepticism reflects the broader Maester philosophy that seeks to replace magical thinking with rational investigation, yet the candles continue to burn regardless of whether their existence fits comfortably within accepted academic theories. The interconnected nature of various divinatory traditions suggests that all forms of prophetic sight may draw upon the same fundamental forces, manifesting differently based on the cultural background and magical heritage of the practitioner. The green dreams of the north, the dragon visions of Valyria, the flame prophecies of R'hllor, and the scrying abilities of glass candles all provide glimpses of truth that transcend normal human perception, yet each comes with its own particular strengths, weaknesses, and interpretive challenges. The reliability of prophetic visions remains frustratingly inconsistent, with some proving remarkably accurate, while others prove either completely false or so symbolic as to be meaningless until after the predicted events have already occurred. This uncertainty creates a fundamental dilemma for those blessed or cursed with prophetic sight, as acting upon uncertain visions may cause the very disasters they were meant to prevent, while ignoring genuine warnings may allow preventable tragedies to unfold unchallenged. The ethical implications of possessing prophetic abilities weigh heavily upon those who must decide whether and how to act upon their visions, particularly when the knowledge they possess could prevent suffering, but might also alter the natural course of events in unforeseen ways. The burden of seeing potential futures without being able to determine which will actually come to pass creates a form of isolation that few can understand, separating seers from normal human experience in ways that can drive even the strongest minds toward madness or despair. In the temples of R'hllor that rise like burning jewels from Lys to Ashai, the priests of the Lord of Light practice a faith that binds together prophecy and flame, shadow and resurrection, in ways that challenge the very foundations of life and death. This ancient religion, older than the Valyrian freehold and more widespread than any other organized faith, teaches that all existence represents a cosmic struggle between R'hllor, the Lord of Light, and his eternal nemesis, the Great Other, whose name must never be spoken. The magic wielded by the Red Priests flows directly from this divine conflict, granting them powers that can heal the sick, raise the dead, and peer into futures yet unwritten. The Red Priestess, Melisandre, stands as perhaps the most visible practitioner of R'hllor's magic in the current age, her abilities demonstrating both the incredible potential and the terrible costs of serving the Lord of Light with absolute devotion. Born in the Shadowlands beyond Shai, where all forms of sorcery flourish without restraint, she learned to blend the traditional fire magic of R'hllor's faith with the darker arts of shadow binding, creating a synthesis of opposing forces that grants her abilities beyond those of conventional Red Priests. Her mastery of glamour magic allows her to weave illusions that can deceive even the most observant watchers, as demonstrated when she disguised the wildling leader Mance Rayder as Rattleshirt, and vice versa. This particular glamour required the use of a ruby as a focus for the spell, the precious stone serving as a repository for the magical energy needed to maintain such a complex deception over an extended period. The ruby burned against the skin of whoever wore it, a constant reminder of the unnatural forces at work beneath the illusion. The process of creating and maintaining glamours demands considerable skill and understanding of human perception, as the magic must account not only for visual appearance, but also for voice, mannerisms, and the subtle cues that allow people to recognize one another. A poorly crafted glamour might fool casual observers, but would collapse under close scrutiny, while a masterful illusion like Melisandre's can withstand even intimate contact without revealing its true nature. The magic draws upon the viewer's expectations and desires, showing them what they wish to see rather than what actually stands before them. The shadow assassins that Melisandre births through her union with Stannis Baratheon represent perhaps the most unsettling aspect of her magical abilities, creatures of living darkness that carry within them a fragment of their creator's will and purpose. The process of creating these beings requires an intimate connection between the priestess and her chosen partner, drawing upon the life force of both participants to give form and substance to what would otherwise remain merely an extension of shadow and flame. The birth of a shadow assassin proves physically and spiritually draining for both parties involved, with each creature requiring a portion of the creator's essence that can never be fully recovered. Stannis aged visibly after serving as the father to the shadow that killed his brother Renly, his hair becoming whiter and his eyes developing a hollow quality that spoke of depths plumbed at great personal cost. Melisandre herself acknowledged that creating too many such creatures would ultimately destroy both of them. The magic, demanding more than mortal flesh, could sustainably provide. These shadow beings exist as perfect assassins, capable of passing through solid barriers and striking down targets who believe themselves safely protected behind walls of stone and steel. They carry within them an echo of their creator's memories and purposes, allowing them to navigate complex situations and identify specific individuals without requiring direct guidance. Once released, however, they cannot be easily controlled or recalled, existing as independent agents of death, whose actions reflect the will that birthed them, but may not precisely match their creator's current intentions. The theological implications of shadow magic within the faith of R'hllor create fascinating contradictions that even learned priests struggle to reconcile. The Lord of Light represents fire, life, and illumination, standing in eternal opposition to darkness and cold, yet his most devoted servants wield shadows as weapons and birth creatures of darkness to serve their holy purposes. Melisandre resolves this apparent paradox by arguing that light requires darkness to give it meaning, that the shadows she creates serve ultimately to banish the greater darkness of the great other. The sacred flames that burn in R'hllor's temples serve as windows into the divine will, offering visions to those who possess the training and dedication to interpret the dancing patterns within the fire. These prophetic flames burn without consuming fuel, sustained by faith and magical energy rather than wood or oil, their light revealing truths that remain hidden from conventional sight. The visions that appear within the flames come unbidden and often prove cryptic, requiring considerable skill to interpret correctly. Melisandre's flame visions have guided her across the narrow sea, from Asshai to Dragonstone, in search of Azor Ahai, reborn, the prophesied hero who will stand against the darkness when the long night returns. Her initial certainty that Stannis Baratheon fulfilled this prophecy gradually gave way to confusion as her visions began showing her different images, culminating in her growing belief that Jon Snow represents the true prince that was promised. This evolution in her understanding demonstrates both the fallibility of prophetic interpretation and the dynamic nature of fate itself. The technique of flame gazing requires years of training to master safely, as staring too long into the sacred fires can damage both physical sight and mental stability. Novice priests learn to approach the flames with proper reverence and preparation, using ritual purification and protective prayers to shield themselves from the more dangerous aspects of divine revelation. Even experienced practitioners find that extended sessions of flame gazing leave them exhausted and disoriented, their consciousness stretched across the boundaries between present and future. The last kiss represents the most solemn and sacred ritual within the Red Faith, performed when servants of R'hllor face death or wish to ease the passing of the faithful. The priest fills their mouth with sacred fire and breathes it into the dying person, supposedly carrying their soul safely into the light of their God's presence. Under normal circumstances, this ritual serves as a form of spiritual comfort rather than an attempt at actual resurrection, providing peace and release rather than a return to mortal life. The resurrection of Beric Dondarrion by the Red Priest Thoros of Myr represents an unprecedented miracle that defied all theological understanding, transforming what should have been a ritual of release into an act of divine intervention. Thoros himself expressed amazement at the outcome, acknowledging that he possessed no special knowledge or training that should have enabled such a feat. The flame that answered his prayers came from R'hllor himself, bypassing the priest's limited understanding to accomplish something that seemed impossible. Each resurrection that Beric underwent cost him something essential, eroding his memories and personality until little remained of the man he had once been. His hair became whiter, his wounds never fully healed, and his recollections of his former life faded like smoke on the wind. Yet his dedication to R'hllor's service only grew stronger with each death and return, as though the parts of him that were lost were replaced by divine purpose and unwavering faith. The transfer of Beric's life force to Catelyn Stark, following her murder at the Red Wedding, demonstrated that the gift of resurrection could be passed from one person to another, though at the ultimate cost of the giver's own existence. The creature that emerged as Lady Stoneheart bore little resemblance to the woman who had died by the trident, transformed by death and dark magic into something driven purely by vengeance and hatred. Her inability to speak, caused by the wounds that killed her, only emphasized how resurrection in this world comes at prices that may render the miracle itself questionable. The worship of R'hllor requires absolute faith and commitment from its adherents, demanding that they surrender their doubts and fears to the certainty of their God's ultimate victory over darkness. This level of devotion grants the most dedicated priests access to powers that transcend normal human limitations, but it also creates a form of spiritual blindness that can lead to terrible mistakes. When divine will is misinterpreted or misunderstood, the Red Priests teach that all magic ultimately derives from the cosmic struggle between light and darkness, with practitioners drawing upon these opposing forces to fuel their spells and miracles. Fire magic represents the pure expression of R'hllor's power, while shadow magic draws upon the spaces between light and dark, where neither force holds complete dominance. This theological framework allows priests to justify using seemingly contradictory abilities in service of their faith, though the psychological toll of wielding both light and darkness proves considerable. The prophecy of Azor Ahai represents the central hope and driving force of the Red Faith, promising that when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world, a hero will emerge to lead the forces of light against the ultimate evil. This prophesied figure will wield Lightbringer, a a sword of fire that burns with the heat of the sun itself, forged through a sacrifice so terrible that its mere recounting causes listeners to shudder with horror and revulsion. The original Azor Ahai achieved his destiny through 3 attempts to forge his legendary weapon, each failure teaching him that greater sacrifices were required to achieve ultimate success. His first attempt saw him work for 30 days and 30 nights, tempering the blade in water, only to watch it shatter when put to use. His second effort lasted 50 days and 50 nights, culminating in an attempt to temper the sword in the heart of a lion. But again, the weapon proved inadequate to its purpose. The final forging of Lightbringer required Azor Ahai to drive the blade through the heart of Nyssa. Nyssa, his beloved wife, her life force and love becoming the final components needed to create a weapon capable of banishing the darkness. The sword that emerged from this ultimate sacrifice burned with inner fire and gave off heat like a living flame, becoming the tool through which the first long night was ended, and the forces of evil were driven back to the uttermost ends of the earth. The identification of the prophesied hero in the current age proves complicated by the symbolic nature of many prophecies and the possibility that multiple individuals might fulfill different aspects of the ancient predictions. Melisandre's evolving understanding of who represents Azor Ahai reborn reflects the challenge of interpreting divine will through the limited perspective of mortal understanding, while the nature of prophecy itself allows for multiple fulfillments of the same basic pattern across different times and circumstances. The growth of R'hllor's influence in Westeros coincides with the return of dragons to the world and the increasing prominence of magical phenomena throughout the known world. The Red Priests interpret these developments as signs that the final confrontation between light and darkness approaches, requiring greater dedication and more dramatic demonstrations of their god's power. This sense of approaching crisis drives them to take increasingly bold actions in their efforts to identify and support the prophesied hero. The magic practiced by followers of R'hllor demonstrates that divine power can manifest through human agents, granting abilities that transcend the normal limitations of mortality, while demanding absolute faith and obedience in return. The Red Priests serve as conduits for forces beyond their complete understanding, wielding powers that could easily corrupt lesser individuals while maintaining their dedication to a cause that transcends personal ambition or desire. The ancient gift of skin changing flows through the bloodlines of the first men like a river that runs sometimes deep and sometimes shallow, manifesting in those who carry within their veins the oldest magic of Westeros. This ability to slip one's consciousness into the mind of a beast and see through its eyes represents one of the most intimate forms of magical connection possible, creating bonds that transcend the normal boundaries between human and animal consciousness. Yet, for all its wonder, skin changing carries with it dangers that can destroy both the practitioner and those around them, demanding a wisdom and restraint that few possess naturally. The Stark children of Winterfell exemplify how this gift manifests in the present age, each bonding with a direwolf pup in ways that go far beyond simple pet ownership to become something approaching a merging of souls. Jon Snow's connection with his albino wolf ghost demonstrates the subtlety with which skin changing can develop, beginning as shared dreams and gradually evolving into a relationship where the boundaries between man and beast become increasingly difficult to distinguish. The wolf's unusual silence mirrors Jon's own tendency toward quiet observation, while its white fur and red eyes mark it as different from its littermates, just as Jon's bastard birth sets him apart from his siblings. Arya Stark's bond with her direwolf Nymeria proved shorter-lived but no less intense. The forced separation when she drove the wolf away to protect it from royal justice, creating a wound that never fully healed, even across vast distances. She continues to experience wolf dreams that show her Nymeria leading a massive pack through the Riverlands, suggesting that the connection between skin changer and beast can endure despite physical separation. These glimpses of her wolf's activities provide Arya with a form of comfort and connection to her lost identity, even as she struggles to become no one in the House of Black and White. Bran Stark's transformation from a boy who dreamed of knighthood into the most powerful skin changer of his generation illustrates both the potential and the cost of fully embracing this ancient gift. His fall from Winterfell's broken tower not only crippled his body, but somehow awakened magical abilities that might otherwise have remained dormant, as though the trauma of his injury opened pathways in his mind that had previously been closed. His early experiences with Summer, his direwolf, provided the foundation for abilities that would eventually allow him to inhabit ravens, wolves, and even human beings. The three sacred laws that govern skin changing reflect the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who learned through bitter experience the prices that this magic can demand. The prohibition against eating human flesh while in animal form acknowledges that the beast's instincts can overwhelm human morality, leading to acts that would be unthinkable under normal circumstances. Bran's violation of this taboo, when Summer fed on corpses during the journey beyond the wall, demonstrates how easily the lines between human and animal consciousness can blur when survival is at stake. The second law forbidding skin changers from mating while in animal form recognizes that the boundaries between human and beast sexuality can become dangerously confused when consciousness slips between different bodies. The offspring of such unions, if they were possible, would represent a fundamental violation of the natural order that separates the rational from the instinctual. This prohibition also serves to protect the skin changer's human relationships and identity from being overwhelmed by animal urges and behaviors. The third and most serious taboo prohibits skin changers from entering the minds of other human beings, recognizing this act as a form of spiritual violation equivalent to rape or murder. The human mind possesses a complexity and sanctity that animal consciousness lacks, making forced mental intrusion a crime against the very essence of personhood. Bran's repeated violations of this law through his control of Hodor demonstrate how power without wisdom can lead even well-intentioned individuals down paths of moral corruption. Hodor's tragic fate illustrates the devastating consequences that can result when skin-changing abilities are used without proper restraint or understanding. The simple-minded giant initially resisted Bran's mental intrusions, but repeated violations of his consciousness gradually wore down his defenses until he could no longer fight back effectively. The transformation of a once gentle soul into a cowering victim who lived in constant fear of losing control over his own body represents one of the most heartbreaking examples of magical abuse in the entire saga. The revelation that Hodor's condition resulted from Bran's future interference with his past consciousness adds layers of temporal complexity to the tragedy, while highlighting the dangerous unpredictability of powerful magic. The stable boy Wylus became Hodor when his mind was damaged by experiencing his own future death through Bran's skin-changing abilities, creating a causal loop that spans decades and demonstrates how the gift of sight can become a curse that destroys innocent lives across multiple timelines. Varamir Sixskins represents the dark potential of skin changing, taken to its ultimate extreme, a wildling whose mastery of the gift allowed him to control multiple animals simultaneously, while gradually losing touch with his own humanity. His ability to inhabit wolves, bears, ravens, and other creatures made him a figure of fear and respect among the free folk, yet his power came at the cost of emotional connections and moral restraints that keep most people anchored to their human identity. The wildling skin changer's attempted violation of the young woman's mind in his final moments demonstrates how the gift can corrupt those who wield it without wisdom or compassion. His belief that he could escape death by forcing his consciousness into an unwilling human host reveals the ultimate selfishness that can result when magical ability is divorced from ethical considerations. The woman's successful resistance to his intrusion, aided by the presence of her own latent, skin-changing abilities, shows that the human spirit possesses defenses against such violations when it recognizes the nature of the attack. The concept of second life offers skin changers a form of immortality that comes with the gradual loss of human consciousness and identity. When a skin changer's physical body dies, while their consciousness remains linked to an animal, they can survive within the beast's mind. But this survival proves temporary and ultimately hollow. Day by day, the human memories and personality fade until nothing remains except the animal's natural instincts and behaviors, creating a form of existence that preserves life at the cost of everything that makes that life meaningful. Jon Snow's apparent death at the hands of his Night's Watch brothers creates the possibility that his consciousness might survive within Ghost until his human body can be restored to life. His increasing identification with his direwolf throughout the later books, experiencing moments when he feels more alive in wolf dreams than in his waking life, suggests that the boundaries between his human and animal selves had already begun to blur before his assassination. Should resurrection prove possible, the question remains whether enough of Jon's human consciousness would survive the experience to allow him to reclaim his original identity. The direwolves themselves represent more than simple animals enhanced by magical bonding, serving as extensions of their human companions' personalities and abilities in ways that suggest a deeper mystical connection. Ghost's ability to move silently reflects Jon's skill at remaining unnoticed and unheard, while Nymeria's fierce independence mirrors Arya's refusal to be tamed by those who would control her. Summer's playful nature balanced Bran's serious temperament, while Grey Wind's tactical intelligence complemented Robb's strategic mind during the War of the Five Kings. The loss of a direwolf inevitably affects its human partner in profound ways, creating emotional wounds that never fully heal, and sometimes triggering changes in personality or behavior. Lady's execution marked the beginning of Sansa's disillusionment with the romantic ideals she had cherished, while Grey Wind's death at the Red Wedding preceded Robb's own murder by mere moments. These connections suggest that the bonds between Skin Changer and Beast operate on levels that transcend simple magical enhancement to become fundamental aspects of identity and spiritual well-being. The rarity of skin-changing abilities in the current age reflects the dilution of First Men blood through intermarriage with Andal settlers, and the general decline of magic throughout Westeros following the death of the last dragons. Where once entire clans might have counted skin changers among their members, the gift now appears perhaps once in 1,000 births, and often remains undeveloped due to lack of proper training or suitable animal partners. The return of magic to the world may awaken dormant abilities in bloodlines that have carried the potential for generations. The ethical implications of skin changing extend beyond the simple question of whether animals possess rights that humans should respect, encompassing broader questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of the soul itself. The ability to experience life through non-human senses and instincts can provide profound insights into the natural world, while also risking the loss of human perspective and moral judgment. The skin changer must constantly navigate the tension between embracing their gift and maintaining their humanity. The training traditionally provided to young skin changers among the free folk emphasizes the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between human and animal consciousness, while developing the mental discipline necessary to control the transition between different forms of awareness. Without proper guidance, newly manifested abilities can overwhelm inexperienced practitioners, leading to confusion, madness, or the gradual dissolution of human identity into animal instinct. The connection between skin changing and green sight suggests that both abilities draw upon the same fundamental magical forces, with the more powerful gift encompassing and transcending the lesser one. Bran's development from simple skin changer to full green seer demonstrates how mastery of animal consciousness can serve as preparation for the far greater challenge of communing with the ancient network of weirwoods and accessing the accumulated memories of countless generations. The survival of skin-changing traditions among the wildlings reflects their preservation of older ways and their closer connection to the natural world that exists beyond the wall. Free of the Andal influences that have shaped southern Westeros, the free folk maintain practices and beliefs that allow magical gifts to flourish in ways that would be impossible in more civilized regions, where such abilities might be feared or suppressed. The ultimate tragedy of skin changing lies in its potential to grant profound understanding and connection, while simultaneously isolating its practitioners from normal human relationships and experiences. Those who can share consciousness with beasts often find themselves unable to fully connect with people who lack similar gifts, creating a loneliness that grows deeper with each exercise of their abilities. The power to transcend human limitations comes at the cost of belonging fully to humanity itself. The most feared and reviled of all magical practices, blood magic demands a price that few are willing to pay, and fewer still can afford to give. This ancient art draws its power from the most fundamental force of existence, the crimson tide that carries life through mortal veins, transforming death into energy and sacrifice into supernatural might. From the shadowlands of Ashai to the smoking ruins of old Valyria, from the ritual chambers of forgotten temples to the desperate acts of those who have lost everything they held dear, blood magic has shaped the destiny of empires and individuals alike, leaving behind a legacy written in pain and sealed with suffering. The Maigi Miri Maz-Dur stands as perhaps the most infamous practitioner of blood magic in recent memory, her actions demonstrating both the terrible potential and the inevitable betrayals that accompany this darkest of arts. Trained in the healing traditions of her people, but corrupted by knowledge learned from shadowbinders and death dealers, she possessed the skills to preserve life and the wisdom to understand that every magical working demands payment in kind. Her encounter with Daenerys Targaryen and Khal Drogo would prove that even the most desperate circumstances cannot justify the horrors that blood magic can unleash. The ritual she performed to save Drogo's life required more than simple herbs and traditional healing techniques, demanding a sacrifice that would fuel the magical energies needed to call a soul back from the edge of death. The lamb that died beneath her blade provided only the beginning of the price, its innocent blood serving as a down payment on a debt that would ultimately demand far more precious currency. The true cost became clear only when Daenerys realized that her unborn son, Rhaego, had been claimed by the magic, his life force drained away to sustain her husband's failing body. The horror of this exchange reveals the fundamental principle that governs all blood magic: the law of equivalent exchange that demands a life for a life, power for power, in transactions that can never be reversed or undone. Drogo's survival came at the cost of his consciousness and will, leaving him trapped in a body that breathed and moved but contained nothing of the fierce warrior who had conquered nations on horseback. His existence became a mockery of life itself, neither truly living nor properly dead, sustained by magic that had preserved his flesh while allowing his spirit to wander, lost in realms beyond mortal understanding. Miri Maz-Dur's contempt for her captors colored every aspect of the ritual she performed, transforming what might have been an act of healing into a calculated revenge that would destroy the very people she pretended to serve. Her knowledge of blood magic allowed her to twist the working in ways that satisfied the letter of Daenerys' demands while violating their spirit, creating a result that technically fulfilled the bargain, while ensuring that the consequences would prove unbearable for all involved. The burning of Drogo's funeral pyre provided Daenerys with the opportunity to turn the principles of blood magic to her own purposes, though whether through intuitive understanding or desperate inspiration remains unclear. The addition of Miri Maz-Dur to the flames created a sacrifice of sufficient power to fuel the working she desired, while her own entry into the fire served as both an act of faith and a demonstration of her unique magical nature. The 3 dragon eggs that had seemed nothing more than fossilized relics absorbed the magical energies released by the Maegie's death, transforming from stone into living creatures that would reshape the balance of power throughout the known world. The success of Daenerys's improvised blood magic ritual demonstrates that this forbidden art can be mastered through instinct and desperation, as well as through formal training and study. The Targaryen blood that flowed through her veins carried within it the memory of old Valyria's fire magic, providing her with an intuitive understanding of how to channel the forces she sought to unleash. The dragons that emerged from her pyre represented far more than simple magical creatures, serving as living symbols of her transformation from exiled princess to mother of dragons. The legend of Azor Ahai and the forging of Lightbringer provides the most famous example of blood magic used for heroic purposes, though the price demanded by this ultimate working remains almost too terrible to contemplate. The legendary hero's 3 attempts to create his prophesized weapon demonstrate the escalating costs that powerful magic inevitably demands, beginning with simple materials and culminating in the sacrifice of what he loved most in all the world. The first forging saw Azor Ahai work for 30 days and 30 nights, tempering his blade in water drawn from sacred springs and cooling it with techniques passed down through generations of master smiths. Yet, when he tested the weapon against his enemies, the steel shattered like glass, proving inadequate to the cosmic struggle that awaited him. This failure taught him that ordinary methods would never suffice for extraordinary purposes, that the darkness he faced required weapons forged through means that transcended conventional understanding. His second attempt required 50 days and 50 nights of labor, culminating in the ultimate test when he drove the blade through the heart of a living lion to temper it with the great cat's life force and courage. The beast's death provided more power than water alone could offer. Yet even this sacrifice proved insufficient when the sword again broke under the strain of battle. The failure of his second working revealed that blood alone was not enough, that the magic he sought to harness demanded sacrifice of a more personal and meaningful nature. The final forging of Lightbringer required Azor Ahai to make the most terrible choice imaginable, plunging the blade he had crafted through the heart of Nyssa, his beloved wife, whose love had sustained him through all his trials and tribulations. Her willing sacrifice transformed the sword from mere steel into something that burned with inner fire, its edge holding heat that could slice through the weapons of the others, while its light could banish shadows and drive back the forces of eternal winter. The psychological cost of this ultimate sacrifice may have been even greater than the magical power it provided, transforming Azor Ahai from a hero fighting to save his people into a man forever haunted by the memory of murdering the woman he loved most. The sword that emerged from Nyssa's death carried within its steel not only her life force, but also the weight of his guilt and grief, making every victory bittersweet and every battle a reminder of what he had lost to achieve them. The Red Priests of R'hllor practice their own forms of blood magic, though they prefer to frame their rituals in terms of divine service rather than acknowledging the darker implications of their actions. Melisandre's use of king's blood demonstrates how political power can be transformed into magical energy, with the royal heritage of sacrifice victims serving to amplify the effectiveness of spells and working. Her leeching of Edric Storm's blood allowed Stannis to speak the names of his enemies while consigning their essences to the flames, creating a form of sympathetic magic that would eventually claim the lives of Balon Greyjoy, Robb Stark, and Joffrey Baratheon. The effectiveness of these blood-fueled curses raises disturbing questions about the relationship between political legitimacy and magical potency, suggesting that royal blood carries within it a supernatural significance that transcends mere social convention. The bastard children of kings prove particularly valuable for such workings, their mixed heritage creating a tension between legitimacy and illegitimacy that somehow enhances their magical properties when used as sacrificial components. Melisandre's willingness to burn men alive in service to her god reveals how blood magic can corrupt even those who believe themselves to be serving righteous causes, transforming acts of worship into exercises in cruelty that would horrify any normal observer. The screams of burning men become prayers in her understanding, their agony transformed into magical energy that empowers her spells and provides R'hllor with the strength needed to battle the forces of darkness. The ancient Valyrians built their entire civilization upon foundations of blood magic, using the life force of slaves and captives to power the spells that gave them dominion over dragons and the ability to forge weapons that could cut through any armor. Their empire's expansion across Essos was fueled as much by the need for fresh sacrificial victims as by simple territorial ambition, with conquered populations providing both the labor needed for construction projects and the magical energy required to maintain their supernatural advantages. The dragon roads that connected Valyrian territories were paved with stones that had been baptized in blood, creating thoroughfares that would endure for millennia without requiring maintenance or repair. The fortifications that guarded their cities incorporated the bones and ashes of sacrificial victims into their mortar, creating walls that could resist both conventional siege engines and magical attacks from enemy sorcerers. Even their ships carried blood-blessed timbers that made them faster and more seaworthy than vessels built through mundane craftsmanship alone. The flesh pits of Gogossos represent perhaps the most depraved application of blood magic in recorded history, where Valyrian overseers conducted experiments that transformed human beings into monstrous hybrids that served no purpose beyond satisfying their creator's curiosity about the limits of magical transformation. These abominations combined human intelligence with animal instincts and supernatural abilities, creating beings that were neither fully human nor properly beast, but something altogether more disturbing. The necromancy practiced by Qyburn in King's Landing demonstrates how blood magic can be combined with conventional medical knowledge to achieve results that neither discipline could accomplish alone. His experiments on living subjects provided him with insights into the nature of life and death that purely theoretical study could never have revealed, while his use of condemned criminals as test subjects allowed him to perfect techniques that would eventually restore Sir Gregor Clegane to a form of terrible unlife. The creation of Sir Robert Strong required not only Qyburn's medical expertise, but also access to magical energies that could reanimate dead flesh and bind unwilling souls to corrupted bodies. The process involved the sacrifice of numerous women whose life force was drained to power the working their deaths, providing the energy needed to transform the mountain from a corpse into an engine of destruction that felt neither pain nor fatigue, nor any human emotion that might interfere with its function as a weapon. The ethical implications of blood magic extend far beyond simple questions of murder and sacrifice, encompassing broader issues about the nature of consent, the value of individual life, and the prices that societies should be willing to pay for power and protection. Those who practice these dark arts inevitably find themselves isolated from normal human relationships, as their willingness to treat other people as sources of magical energy corrupts their ability to form genuine emotional connections. The corrupting influence of blood magic affects not only its practitioners, but also the societies that tolerate or encourage its use, creating cultures where human life becomes a commodity to be bought and sold rather than something possessing inherent dignity and worth. The normalization of sacrifice for magical purposes leads inevitably to the devaluation of those deemed suitable for such use, typically the poor, the foreign, and the powerless who lack the political influence to protect themselves. The addictive nature of blood magic creates a cycle of escalating violence and sacrifice, as practitioners discover that each working requires greater and more terrible prices than the one before. The initial success of relatively minor spells creates confidence that more ambitious projects can be attempted, leading to magical arms races where competing sorcerers seek ever more powerful sources of sacrificial energy to fuel their increasingly grandiose schemes. The temporary nature of most blood magic results means that the benefits gained through sacrifice tend to fade over time, unless constantly renewed through fresh atrocities, creating a system where practitioners must commit ever more frequent murders to maintain their supernatural advantages. This requirement for constant renewal ensures that blood mages become increasingly desperate and ruthless as their power grows, transforming them into monsters who view other human beings as nothing more than fuel for their magical ambitions. The ultimate tragedy of blood magic lies in its promise to solve problems through the application of supernatural force, while actually creating far greater difficulties than those it claims to address. The power gained through sacrifice comes at costs that extend far beyond the immediate victims, corrupting the practitioner's soul while poisoning the moral foundations of any society that permits such atrocities to flourish in pursuit of temporary advantages over their enemies. Beyond the familiar shores of Westeros and the well-traveled trade routes of western Essos lie realms where magic flourishes in forms both wondrous and terrifying, where ancient civilizations built monuments to powers that defy comprehension, and where the very air trembles with energies that can transform mortals into gods or reduce them to less than dust. These distant lands harbor secrets that predate the rise of Valyria by millennia, preserving traditions of sorcery that trace their origins to the dawn of human consciousness, and the first tentative attempts to harness forces beyond the material world. The Shadowlands beyond Ashai stretch into regions where few mortals dare to venture, and fewer still return with their sanity intact. These territories exist in a state of perpetual twilight, shrouded beneath skies that never fully brighten into day nor deepen into true night, creating an atmosphere of eternal dusk that seems to drain the life from everything it touches. The very geography of these lands defies natural law, with rivers that flow uphill, forests where the trees grow downward into the earth, and mountains that seem to shift their positions when no one is watching. Ashai itself stands as perhaps the most enigmatic city in the known world. Its massive walls and towering structures carved from a type of black stone that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The material from which the city is built predates any known civilization, showing no signs of quarrying or construction techniques that human hands could have accomplished. Instead, the buildings appear to have been shaped by forces that worked on a scale beyond mortal comprehension, creating architecture that follows no earthly pattern, yet somehow achieves a harmony that speaks to something deep within the human soul. The population of Ashai remains mysteriously sparse, despite the city's enormous size, with vast districts standing empty and silent, as though waiting for inhabitants who will never come. Those who do dwell within its shadow-haunted streets represent the most diverse collection of magical practitioners found anywhere in the world, drawn from every continent and culture by the promise of knowledge that cannot be obtained elsewhere. Shadowbinders walk beside fire mages, blood sorcerers share wine with necromancers, and practitioners of arts so obscure they lack common names conduct their research in laboratories that would horrify any civilized observer. The absence of children in Ashai creates an atmosphere of profound unnaturalness that affects even the most hardened visitors, suggesting that the city's magical environment proves hostile to new life and growth. Animals brought within its walls sicken and die within days, their flesh becoming tainted by energies that make it dangerous to consume, while plants wither and blacken as though touched by invisible flames that burn without heat or light. The ancient city of Stygai, known to the inhabitants of Ashai as the Corpse City, lies deeper within the Shadowlands, where even the bravest Shadowbinders fear to tread. Legends speak of this place as the heart of darkness itself, where the first practitioners of forbidden magic conducted experiments that tore holes in reality and invited entities from other dimensions to make their home in the mortal world. The few accounts that survive describe streets paved with bones and buildings constructed from crystallized screams, though most scholars dismiss such reports as the ravings of minds broken by exposure to forces beyond human understanding. The dragons that allegedly dwell in the deepest reaches of the Shadowlands differ fundamentally from their Valyrian cousins, existing as creatures of shadow and nightmare rather than fire and blood. These beings possess an intelligence that transcends animal cunning, speaking in voices that bypass the ears to implant words directly into the minds of those who encounter them. Their presence warps reality in ways that make conventional combat impossible, as they can exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions while maintaining consciousness in each separate manifestation. The ruins of the great empire of the dawn scatter across the eastern regions of Essos like broken teeth, remnants of a civilization so ancient that its very existence has passed into the realm of legend and myth. According to the fragmentary records that survive in the libraries of Yi, this empire predated even the first stirrings of Valyrian power by thousands of years, ruling over territories that stretched from the Jade Sea to the Grey Waste during an age when magic flowed as freely as water. The Azure Emperor, first ruler of this forgotten realm, allegedly possessed the ability to command the winds and waves, raising islands from the ocean floor and carving new rivers through mountain ranges with gestures that required no more effort than breathing. His successors each mastered different aspects of the mystical arts, with the Tourmaline Emperor learning to speak with the dead, while the Onyx Emperor gained dominion over darkness itself, creating spells that could extinguish stars and plunge entire regions into eternal night. The reign of the Bloodstone Emperor marked the beginning of the end for this golden age, as his embrace of necromancy and demon worship brought corruption that spread like plague throughout the Empire's territories. His murder of his sister, the Amethyst Empress, violated fundamental laws that governed the relationship between the living and the dead, creating a spiritual wound that allowed malevolent forces to pour into the mortal world from realms that should have remained forever sealed. The long night that followed the Bloodstone Emperor's crimes was not confined to Westeros, but affected the entire known world, bringing darkness and terror to regions that had never experienced winter or known the touch of supernatural evil. The collapse of the great empire of the dawn during this period suggests that the ancient rulers had somehow been responsible for maintaining cosmic balances that prevented the intrusion of otherworldly threats into the material realm. The 5 forts that guard the northeastern borders of Yi stand as monuments to the terror that the long night brought to the eastern lands, their massive walls rising higher than the wall of Westeros, while incorporating defensive features designed to repel enemies that conventional fortifications could never hope to contain. The black stone from which they are constructed matches the material found in Ashai, and the ancient ruins of Yin in Sothorios, suggesting connections between distant civilizations that shared knowledge of construction techniques beyond current human understanding. The Lion of Night, worshipped in Yi bears disturbing similarities to the Great, other feared by the Red Priests of R'hllor, suggesting that the same malevolent force may manifest under different names across various cultures while maintaining consistent characteristics The demons that allegedly serve this entity match descriptions of creatures encountered during the original Long Night in Westeros, implying that the threats faced by different civilizations share common origins in realms beyond normal reality. The Golden Empire of Yi represents the modern successor to these ancient powers, though its current rulers possess only pale shadows of the abilities wielded by their legendary predecessors. The Azure throne from which they govern incorporates fragments of materials that predate human civilization, providing those who sit upon it with enhanced perception and longevity that comes at the cost of gradual transformation into something no longer entirely human. The warlocks of Qarth practice a form of magic centered around the consumption of shade of the evening, a psychoactive substance that grants temporary access to prophetic visions while slowly poisoning those who partake of it. The House of the Undying, where they conduct their rituals, exists in a state of controlled temporal distortion, with rooms that connect to different points in history and chambers where past, present, and future become indistinguishable from one another. The Undying Ones who rule over this mysterious structure have extended their natural lifespans through magical means that preserve their consciousness while allowing their physical forms to decay into mummified husks. These ancient beings feed upon the life force of visitors to sustain their unnatural existence, creating a symbiotic relationship with the younger warlocks who serve as their agents in the outside world. Daenerys Targaryen's visit to the House of the Undying provided her with visions that encompassed both literal glimpses of future events and symbolic representations of choices yet to be made. The experience demonstrated how different forms of prophetic magic can interact with one another, as her Targaryen blood allowed her to perceive meanings in the visions that would have remained hidden from observers lacking draconic heritage. The destruction of the Undying Ones by Drogon's flames proved that even ancient magical beings possess vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those who understand the fundamental forces that sustain their existence. The fire that dragons breathe contains properties that transcend simple combustion, incorporating magical energies that can unravel spells and dissolve enchantments that have endured for centuries. The jade seas that separate the known world from the uttermost east contain islands where reality follows different rules and physical laws bend to accommodate forces that have no equivalent in more familiar regions. Travelers who venture into these waters report encounters with sea serpents the size of islands, floating cities inhabited by beings that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and storms that consist of pure magical energy rather than wind and rain. The port cities that serve these distant waters maintain populations of individuals whose heritage combines human blood with that of creatures from beyond the normal world, creating hybrid beings whose abilities transcend anything possible through purely mortal lineage. These half-human inhabitants serve as intermediaries between conventional merchants and the otherworldly entities that control trade in the most exotic magical substances and artifacts. The Summer Islands, far to the south, maintain their own traditions of magic, focused on harmony with nature and the cultivation of life, rather than its destruction or exploitation. Their practitioners, known as singers, can encourage plant growth, heal diseases, and communicate with animals through methods that require no sacrifice or payment beyond patience and respect for the natural world. The swan ships that carry their ambassadors to distant lands are grown rather than built, shaped from living wood that continues to flourish even after being crafted into sailing vessels. These ships require no conventional navigation, as they can sense currents of magical energy that flow beneath the ocean's surface, following invisible paths that connect all the world's waters in a vast network of mystical significance. The religious practices of the Summer Islanders center around gratitude for the abundance that their islands provide, rather than appeals for supernatural intervention in mortal affairs. Their ceremonies involve the offering of songs and dances that celebrate life in all its forms, creating harmonious relationships between human consciousness and the spiritual forces that govern natural cycles. The interaction between these various Eastern magical traditions and the resurgent power of dragons creates possibilities for synthesis and advancement that could revolutionize the practice of sorcery throughout the known world. The arrival of Daenerys Targaryen in Slaver's Bay has already begun to catalyze changes that extend far beyond simple political upheaval, awakening dormant abilities in bloodlines that have carried latent potential for generations, while providing new sources of magical energy that ambitious practitioners are eager to exploit. The convergence of different mystical systems in the modern age suggests that the barriers between various forms of magic are breaking down, allowing for combinations and interactions that were previously impossible. This development holds both tremendous promise for those seeking to expand human knowledge and terrible danger for civilizations unprepared to handle forces that their ancestors wisely chose to keep separate and contained. In the ancient city of Braavos, where the Titan stands guard against the encroaching sea, and 100 isles are bound together by bridges and ambition, there exists a temple that serves no god, whose name can be spoken aloud. The House of Black and White rises from the misty waters like a monument to the ultimate mystery, its facade split between ebony darkness and ivory light in perfect symmetry that reflects the duality of existence itself. Within these walls, the faceless men practice their ancient art, serving the many-faced god who is known by countless names, yet remains forever nameless, forever beyond the reach of mortal understanding. The origins of the faceless men trace back to the slave mines of old Valyria, where those condemned to toil in the fiery depths of the 14 flames discovered that death could be transformed from curse into blessing through proper understanding and application. The first of their order emerged not from temples or academies, but from the desperate prayers of those who saw no escape from their torment except through the ultimate release. These earliest practitioners learned that death was not an ending, but a transformation. Not a failure of life, but its most perfect expression when properly achieved. The gift of death that the faceless men offer to the world represents far more than simple assassination, encompassing a philosophy that views mortality as the fundamental equalizer that renders all human pretensions meaningless in the face of ultimate truth. kings and beggars, merchants and slaves, the wise and the foolish, all must eventually pass through the same doorway that leads from existence into whatever lies beyond, making death the most democratic force in a world otherwise divided by wealth, power, and privilege. The training that transforms ordinary individuals into servants of the many-faced God begins with the most difficult task imaginable, the complete abandonment of personal identity in service to something greater than individual desire or ambition. Novices must surrender not only their names and histories, but also their attachments to the people and places that once gave their lives meaning, accepting that true service requires the dissolution of the self into perfect instruments of divine will. Arya Stark's journey through this transformation reveals both the allure and the horror of becoming no one, as her desperate need for revenge and justice conflicts with the demands of a calling that recognizes no distinction between the innocent and the guilty. Her struggle to abandon her identity as a member of House Stark demonstrates how deeply personal history becomes embedded in the human soul, creating resistance that prevents even the most determined individuals from achieving the complete selflessness that the faceless men require. The faces that hang within the Hall of Faces represent more than simple disguises or tools of deception, serving as repositories for the essence of those who have passed from life into the service of the many-faced God. Each visage carries within it not merely the physical appearance of its former owner, but also fragments of memory, personality, and experience that can overwhelm those unprepared for the weight of borrowed identity. The process of assuming a new face involves both magical transformation and psychological discipline, requiring practitioners to immerse themselves so completely in their adopted personas that the boundary between actor and role disappears entirely. This technique demands years of training to master safely, as the risk of losing oneself within a borrowed identity proves as dangerous as any physical threat the faceless men might face in their missions. The magic that enables these transformations draws upon forces far older than human civilization, tapping into the fundamental nature of identity itself to reshape both body and spirit according to necessity. The glamours employed by other practitioners of the mystical arts pale beside the complete metamorphosis achieved by properly trained, faceless men whose assumed identities prove indistinguishable from the original even to those who knew the deceased intimately. The preparation of faces for use by the faceless men involves rituals that honor both the deceased and the many-faced God, while ensuring that the magical properties necessary for transformation remain intact. The process requires careful preservation techniques combined with incantations that bind the essence of the departed to their physical remains, creating artifacts that serve as bridges between life and death. The selection of faces for specific missions reflects the deep understanding that experienced faceless men possess regarding human nature and the social dynamics that govern different communities. The choice of which identity to assume can determine the success or failure of an assignment, as the wrong appearance or manner might attract unwanted attention or fail to provide access to the necessary locations and individuals. The philosophical foundations of the Faceless Men rest upon the belief that death represents the ultimate truth of existence, the final reality that strips away all illusions and pretenses to reveal what truly matters in the cosmic order. This understanding leads them to view their assassinations not as murders, but as acts of mercy, releasing their targets from the burdens of life, while serving the greater purpose of maintaining balance in a world where suffering often outweighs joy. The training in the arts of killing that all faceless men must master encompasses far more than simple techniques for ending life quickly and quietly. Students learn to read the subtle signs that indicate when death would be welcomed rather than feared, to distinguish between those who cling desperately to existence and those who have already begun the process of letting go, and to choose methods that honor both the individual and the larger cosmic forces they serve. The poisons employed by the Faceless Men range from substances that cause peaceful sleep, followed by gentle cessation of breath, to compounds that create the appearance of natural death from disease or accident. The preparation of these toxins requires extensive knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and the countless ways that mortal flesh can fail when exposed to the proper catalysts. Each poison serves a specific purpose, chosen not only for its effectiveness, but also for its appropriateness to the particular circumstances surrounding each mission. The concept of payment for the services of the Faceless Men reflects their understanding that death must be earned rather than simply purchased, requiring those who seek their aid to surrender something of genuine value rather than merely exchanging coin for killing. The price demanded might be gold for the wealthy, but it could equally be years of service, cherished memories, or the surrender of something precious that cannot be replaced once lost. The refusal of the Faceless Men to accept contracts that serve purely selfish or evil purposes demonstrates their commitment to serving justice rather than mere vengeance, distinguishing their work from that of common assassins who kill for profit without regard for the moral implications of their actions. This selectivity ensures that their gifts serve the greater good, even when the specific reasons for particular deaths remain hidden from public understanding. The temple itself serves as both sanctuary and school, providing a space where the arts of death can be studied and practiced without interference from the secular authorities who govern the rest of Braavos. The building's design reflects the duality of its purpose, offering comfort to those seeking the gift of death, while providing the facilities necessary for training new generations of servants. The kindly man who guides Arya's education represents the ideal toward which all Faceless Men strive, having achieved such complete mastery over identity that he can assume different appearances without external aids, while maintaining perfect emotional balance regardless of circumstances. His patient instruction reveals the depth of wisdom that comes from decades of service to the many-faced god, though even he acknowledges that some aspects of their calling remain beyond complete understanding. The other acolytes who share Arya's training demonstrate the diverse backgrounds from which the Faceless Men recruit their members, as the calling attracts individuals from every nation and social class who share the fundamental qualities necessary for service. The bonds that form between trainees reflect their shared commitment to abandoning personal desires in favor of higher purpose, creating relationships based on mutual respect rather than individual affection. The testing procedures used to evaluate progress in abandoning identity involve scenarios designed to trigger emotional responses that would reveal lingering attachments to former life. These trials can be both physically and psychologically demanding, requiring candidates to demonstrate their willingness to act against their own apparent interests when duty demands such sacrifice. The magical aspects of faceless men training extend beyond simple face changing to encompass a broader understanding of how identity functions within human consciousness and society. Students learn to manipulate not only their own appearance and manner, but also the perceptions of others, creating comprehensive deceptions that encompass every aspect of human interaction. The ultimate test of a fully trained, faceless man lies not in their ability to kill efficiently, but in their capacity to serve the many-faced god without allowing personal judgment or emotion to interfere with their missions. This level of detachment requires a form of spiritual development that few individuals can achieve, making successful completion of the training extraordinarily rare, even among those who begin the process with genuine dedication. The relationship between the faceless men and other magical practitioners remains complex and often antagonistic, as their philosophy of death as release conflicts with the life-preserving goals of healers, while their methods of achieving justice through assassination challenge the authority of conventional legal systems. Yet, their services prove valuable enough that even their critics occasionally seek their aid when other solutions prove inadequate. The impact of faceless men activities on the broader political and social landscape of the known world remains largely hidden from public view, though careful observers might detect patterns in the deaths of significant figures that suggest intervention by agents whose capabilities transcend those of ordinary assassins. The subtlety with which they operate ensures that their influence extends far beyond what their numbers might suggest possible. From the uttermost north, where winter holds eternal dominion and the very air crystallizes with cold that transcends natural understanding, there emerge beings whose existence challenges every assumption about the nature of life, death, and the forces that govern both. The others, known in the common tongue as White Walkers, represent more than simple enemies to be defeated or monsters to be slain, embodying instead a form of existence so alien to human experience that even their motivations remain shrouded in mystery, deeper than the longest night. Their return after 8,000 years of absence marks not merely the reappearance of legendary creatures, but the awakening of powers that have slumbered since the world was young, when the boundaries between seasons followed different laws, and magic flowed more freely through the veins of creation. The ice magic they wield proves fundamentally different from the fire sorcery of dragons or the blood rituals of human practitioners, drawing upon forces that seem to exist outside the normal flow of time and causation. The physical form of the others defies easy categorization, appearing at first glance as tall, gaunt figures whose pale flesh seems carved from winter itself. Their skin possesses the translucent quality of ancient ice, revealing shadows of what might be veins or muscle beneath surfaces that reflect light without warmth. Their eyes burn with a cold fire that provides illumination without heat, creating an unsettling contrast to the blazing orbs of dragons or the warm flames that dance in hearths throughout the civilized world. The armor they wear appears to be grown rather than forged, consisting of plates and scales that shift color from white to pale blue to silver, depending upon the angle of observation and the quality of light that strikes them. These protective coverings move with the fluid grace of living tissue rather than the rigid constraints of manufactured metal, suggesting that the others possess forms of craftsmanship that transcend human understanding of metallurgy and construction. The weapons wielded by the others demonstrate their mastery over ice in its most refined and deadly applications, creating blades that shine like crystal while cutting through steel as easily as a hot knife passes through butter. These swords of living ice emit an aura of supernatural cold that can shatter conventional weapons upon contact, causing steel to become brittle and fragile before breaking apart like glass struck by a hammer. The process by which the others create these weapons remains one of their most closely guarded secrets, though witnesses report seeing them shape ice with bare hands as though it were soft clay, manipulating the frozen water through force of will rather than conventional tools or techniques. The resulting blades hold edges sharper than any human smith could achieve, while maintaining a flexibility that allows them to bend without breaking under stress that would destroy ordinary weapons. The magic that animates the whites serves as, perhaps, the most visible and terrifying demonstration of the other's power over death itself, transforming fallen warriors into tireless servants who feel neither pain nor fear, nor any emotion that might interfere with their grim purpose. These reanimated corpses retain enough of their original skills to use weapons and follow complex commands. Yet they lack all trace of the personalities that once inhabited their bodies. The creation of whites requires no elaborate rituals or sacrificial ceremonies, suggesting that the others' necromantic abilities flow from their essential nature rather than learned techniques or acquired knowledge. A simple gesture or concentrated attention appears sufficient to transform a fresh corpse into an obedient soldier, though the process works most effectively on bodies that have died recently and retain enough physical integrity to serve as effective combatants. The whites themselves prove surprisingly durable for reanimated corpses, capable of continuing to function even after sustaining damage that would instantly kill any living creature. Severed limbs continue to grasp for weapons or crawl toward enemies, while headless bodies stumble forward with blind persistence that speaks to the alien intelligence that governs their actions. Only fire appears capable of truly destroying them, reducing their animated flesh to ash and ending their unnatural existence. The relationship between the others and their white servants suggests a form of collective consciousness that transcends individual identity, creating a hierarchy where the pale masters serve as nodes of intelligence, while their undead minions function as extensions of a greater will. This arrangement allows a relatively small number of others to command vast armies of the dead, multiplying their effective strength far beyond what their actual numbers might suggest possible. The ice spiders mentioned in ancient legends represent another manifestation of the other's ability to corrupt and transform living creatures into servants of winter, taking ordinary arachnids and enhancing them with supernatural size and intelligence. These creatures allegedly serve as mounts for the others themselves, carrying their riders across frozen landscapes with speed that exceeds any horse while navigating terrain that would prove impassable to conventional cavalry. The motivations that drive the others remain frustratingly opaque to human observers, as their actions suggest purposes that transcend simple conquest or the satisfaction of biological need. Their apparent lack of interest in treasure, territory, or the conventional rewards that motivate human armies implies that they serve goals incomprehensible to mortal minds, perhaps pursuing objectives that exist on timescales measured in millennia rather than years. The cyclical nature of their appearances throughout history suggests that the others operate according to patterns that connect their activities to broader cosmic rhythms, possibly responding to changes in magical energy or astronomical phenomena that occur too slowly for human civilizations to recognize. Their 8,000-year absence followed by sudden return implies that they wait for specific conditions to align before resuming their ancient purposes. The wall that guards the northern border of Westeros incorporates magical defenses specifically designed to prevent the others from passing southward, suggesting that the builders of this tremendous fortification possessed detailed knowledge of their capabilities and limitations. The spells woven into the ice and stone create barriers that affect the others on levels beyond the merely physical, utilizing forces that complement rather than replace the wall's impressive material construction. The effectiveness of these ancient protections depends upon the wall's structural integrity remaining intact, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies who understand the relationship between physical damage and magical functionality. The gates that allow passage through the wall represent particular weak points where the protective spells thin to accommodate legitimate travel, requiring constant vigilance from the Night's Watch to prevent unauthorized intrusions. The children of the forest who allegedly helped construct the wall possessed knowledge of the others that has been largely lost to human understanding, creating a situation where the current guardians lack complete information about the enemies they face. This knowledge gap leaves modern defenders vulnerable to tactics and abilities that their predecessors might have anticipated and prepared to counter through specific countermeasures. The connection between the others and the seasonal patterns that govern Westeros remains one of the most significant mysteries surrounding their nature and purpose. The correlation between their activities and the onset of unusually long and severe winters suggests that they either cause these climatic changes or respond to conditions that trigger both their awakening and the alteration of normal weather patterns. The possibility that the others represent a natural force rather than a malevolent enemy, challenges assumptions about their ultimate goals while raising questions about whether conflict between them and humanity is truly inevitable. If they serve as agents of cosmic balance rather than destroyers seeking conquest, then their return might indicate that some equilibrium has been disturbed and requires correction through means that mortal minds cannot easily comprehend. The ancient pacts that may have governed relations between the others and human civilizations in the distant past could provide crucial insights into alternatives to warfare as means of resolving the current crisis. The Night's King legend suggests that accommodation between the species was once possible, though the ultimate outcome of that arrangement implies that such agreements carry risks that may outweigh their potential benefits. The role of dragon glass in combating the others demonstrates that Valyrian knowledge included understanding of weapons effective against these beings, suggesting that past civilizations faced similar threats and developed countermeasures that remain viable in the present age. The effectiveness of obsidian weapons implies that the others possess vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those who understand the principles behind their apparent invincibility. The return of dragons to the world, coinciding with increased other activity, suggests a connection between these two forms of magical manifestation, possibly indicating that they represent opposing forces whose awakening triggers conflict on a cosmic scale. The balance between ice and fire that this relationship implies could determine not only the outcome of immediate conflicts, but also the long-term stability of the world itself. The psychological impact of facing the others extends far beyond simple fear of death, encompassing existential terror at encountering beings whose very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Their alien intelligence and incomprehensible motivations create a form of cosmic horror that can shatter the sanity of those unprepared for confrontation with forces that transcend human understanding. The ultimate resolution of the threat posed by the others may require not just military victory, but fundamental changes in how human civilizations relate to the magical forces that shape their world, demanding wisdom and courage that transcend conventional approaches to conflict and diplomacy. The hatching of 3 dragons from stone eggs, thought long dead, marked not merely the birth of legendary creatures, but the rekindling of magical forces that had lain dormant across the known world for generations. When Daenerys Targaryen emerged from the flames of Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion clinging to her unburned flesh, she accomplished far more than anyone present could have imagined, sending ripples of awakened power across continents and through dimensions of reality that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. The immediate effects of the dragon's return manifested in ways both subtle and dramatic, as magical practitioners from Ashai to Old Town discovered that spells which had required tremendous effort now responded with surprising ease, while artifacts that had remained inert for centuries suddenly blazed with renewed purpose. The glass candles of the citadel burst into flame for the first time since the death of the last Targaryen dragon, their obsidian surfaces burning with light that gave no heat, yet revealed truths hidden from ordinary sight. The connection between dragons and the fundamental forces of magic appears to operate on principles that transcend simple cause and effect, suggesting that these magnificent creatures serve as catalysts for energies that exist independently of their physical presence. The relationship proves symbiotic rather than parasitic, with the dragons drawing power from the magical environment while simultaneously strengthening the very forces that sustain them, creating a cycle of mutual enhancement that grows more powerful with each passing day. The fire magic practiced by the Red Priests of R'hllor experienced perhaps the most dramatic enhancement following the dragon's birth, with flames that had previously offered only vague glimpses of possible futures, now blazing with visions of startling clarity and detail. Melisandre's own abilities grew substantially more potent during her time on Dragonstone, though whether this resulted from proximity to the dragons themselves or simply from the general increase in magical energy remains a matter of speculation among those who study such phenomena. The warlocks of Karth responded to the dragon's presence with desperate hunger, recognizing that these creatures represented the key to restoring powers that had been fading for generations. As their supplies of shade of the evening grew less potent, and their visions became increasingly fragmented and unreliable, their attempt to capture Daenerys and bind her dragons to their service demonstrated both their understanding of the creature's importance and their willingness to risk everything to possess even a fraction of the power these beings represented. The destruction of the House of the Undying by Drogon's flames proved that the new generation of dragons possessed capabilities that exceeded those of their ancient predecessors, burning through magical protections that had been constructed to withstand assault from conventional fire and even dragon flame as it had been known in ages past. The ease with which the young dragon reduced centuries of accumulated sorcery to ash suggested that the return of these creatures heralded not merely the restoration of old powers, but the emergence of something entirely new and unprecedented. The maesters of the Citadel found their carefully maintained skepticism challenged by phenomena that could no longer be dismissed as superstition or explained away through rational inquiry. The reactivation of glass candles forced even the most dogmatic scholars to acknowledge that forces existed beyond their understanding, though many continued to resist accepting the full implications of what these developments might mean for their worldview and authority. Archmaester Marwyn's immediate departure for Meereen upon learning of the dragon's existence reflected his recognition that the world had entered a new age where knowledge of the mystical arts would prove more valuable than conventional learning. His willingness to abandon his position at the Citadel demonstrated how profoundly the return of dragons had altered the calculations of those who understood the significance of magical resurgence. The faceless men of Braavos responded to the changing magical climate with characteristic adaptability, finding that their shape-changing abilities required less effort to maintain, while their capacity to assume new identities expanded to encompass more complex and demanding transformations. The enhancement of their capabilities proved particularly significant given their role as agents of change and balance throughout the known world. The skin changers beyond the wall discovered that their connections to animal consciousness had grown stronger and more reliable, with the bonds between human and beast deepening to levels that previous generations had achieved only after years of practice and discipline. The direwolves bonded to the Stark children exhibited intelligence and awareness that exceeded anything recorded in historical accounts of similar relationships. The others themselves stirred from their long slumber during this period of magical awakening, though whether their return was triggered by the dragon's birth or simply coincided with it remains unclear. The timing suggests a connection between these apparently opposing forces, implying that the cosmic balance between ice and fire requires both elements to be present and active for the world to function as intended. The wall's magical defenses grew more potent as ambient magical energy increased, with the ancient spells woven into its structure, drawing strength from the same sources that empowered practitioners throughout the world. Yet, this enhancement came with increased sensitivity to disruption, making the barrier more effective against supernatural threats, while simultaneously becoming more vulnerable to damage that might compromise its magical integrity. The green dreams experienced by those with the blood of the first men became more frequent and vivid as magical forces strengthened, providing clearer glimpses of past and future events, while also carrying greater risks for those unprepared to handle the psychological strain of prophetic sight. The children of the forest, who had survived in hidden enclaves, found their own abilities expanding as conditions approached those they had known in the dawn of the world. The Shadowbinders of Ashai reported unprecedented success in their efforts to pierce the veils between dimensions, achieving communion with entities and forces that had remained beyond reach for centuries. The city itself seemed to respond to the changing magical environment, with its black stone buildings exhibiting properties that had been dormant since the time of their construction by unknown hands. The return of magic to Valeria's ruins created opportunities for exploration that had been impossible since the Doom, as protective spells began to function once again, and previously inaccessible areas became navigable for the first time in centuries. The treasures and knowledge that awaited discovery in these reclaimed territories promised to revolutionize understanding of magical theory and practice. The political implications of magical resurgence extended far beyond simple changes in the capabilities of individual practitioners, fundamentally altering the balance of power between nations and institutions. Rulers who had dismissed magic as irrelevant found themselves forced to reconsider their positions as advisors and enemies alike, gained access to abilities that could reshape the outcomes of conflicts through means that conventional military doctrine had never anticipated. The economic effects of increased magical activity created new markets for rare materials and specialized knowledge, while disrupting established trade patterns as goods that had been purely decorative suddenly gained practical value. Dragon eggs, Valyrian steel, obsidian, and other magical substances saw their prices increase dramatically as demand outstripped supply by unprecedented margins. The religious implications proved equally profound, as faith systems built around the premise that the age of miracles had ended were forced to adapt to a reality where supernatural intervention in mortal affairs had become commonplace. The Red Priests of R'hllor gained converts rapidly as their enhanced abilities provided tangible proof of their god's power, while traditional faiths struggled to explain why their own prayers seemed to go unanswered, despite the obvious presence of supernatural forces in the world. The convergence of multiple magical traditions in the eastern regions of Essos created unprecedented opportunities for synthesis and innovation as practitioners from different cultures shared knowledge and techniques that had previously been closely guarded secrets. The resulting hybrid approaches to sorcery showed promise of achievements that surpassed anything accomplished by individual traditions working in isolation. The enhancement of communication abilities through magical means allowed for coordination between distant allies and enemies on scales that had been impossible since the fall of Old Valyria, creating new possibilities for both cooperation and conflict that extended far beyond conventional diplomatic and military channels. The glass candles alone provided capabilities that could revolutionize governance and intelligence gathering for those who possessed the knowledge and resources to utilize them effectively. The return of dragons represented not just the restoration of a single species, but the herald of a new age where magic would once again play a central role in shaping the destiny of civilizations. The choices made by those who wielded these awakened powers would determine whether this resurgence brought enlightenment and prosperity, or unleashed forces that would ultimately consume the very world they sought to transform and control. As dawn breaks over the ancient lands of ice and fire, the mysteries of magic remain as profound as ever. From the crypts of Winterfell to the towers of Ashai, from the frozen wastes beyond the wall to the smoking ruins of Old Valyria, these arcane forces continue to shape the world in ways both seen and unseen. The return of dragons has awakened powers long dormant, and across the narrow sea and beyond, practitioners of the mystical arts find their abilities growing stronger with each passing day. Yet magic in this world remains a double-edged sword, offering great power at terrible cost, granting visions that may mislead as often as they guide, and demanding prices that few are willing to pay. The skin changers who slip between human and beast consciousness risk losing themselves entirely, while the Red Priests who serve their fiery god must reconcile shadow with flame in their pursuit of divine truth. The others march south with ice magic that threatens to freeze the world itself, while blood mages sacrifice the innocent to fuel their darkest ambitions. In the end, these ancient mysteries remind us that some forces transcend the understanding of kings and maesters alike, flowing through the world like unseen currents that connect all living things. The glass candles burn once more. The weirwoods whisper their timeless secrets, and somewhere in the distance, dragons soar through smoke-filled skies. Rest now, and let these timeless secrets carry you into dreams where magic lives eternal.